Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this special televised and intimate debate on board the fabulous Abakus Exponential Yacht here at the Cannes Lions Advertising Festival. We're here to give you, the viewer, the inside track on the topic of attribution, which is on the minds of many an advertiser currently. The latest research by DMR in the States would indicate that 60% of advertisers are intrigued and interested by the concept of attribution, but many still don't quite know what it actually is, whether it's a technology, a business, and we're going to put some of those questions to an expert panel and find out a little bit more about what attribution is and what it can do for brands. So I'm delighted to welcome our fantastic Abakus panel, and let me introduce them for you now. On my immediate left is Anthony Rind. Many of you will know Anthony from the 18 years he spent at Havas Media Context, and is one of the great experts in terms of performance and digital advertising. So welcome, Anthony.
Thank you.
Excellent. Then on his left we have Sylvain Le Born, who's Executive Vice President of Data Platforms at Havas Media, who is already doing a number of really interesting cases in attribution for many of the Havas clients, and we're going to learn a little bit more over the course of the discussion. Welcome.
Thank you.
Excellent. Then we have Mr. Alain Portman. Alain is the Head of Media and Insights at the House of Kaizen, an intriguing and interesting agency which is doing some fantastic work for the Avis business globally. So welcome on board, sir.
Thanks for having me.
And then we have Mr. Hugh Griffiths. And I always have to check everyone's titles because, you know, ultimately they're kind of the same thing, but they're all couched in lots of different terms. So Hugh is the Global Chief Performance Officer for Universal McCann at Media Brands, and of course running a vast array of global clients for that organisation. Hugh, welcome on board.
Thank you very much.
The Abakus Yacht. And last but certainly not least is, dare I say it, one of the fathers of the new forms of attribution business, the CTO of Abakus, Alex Saldanha, and he's our final panelist. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you. Please,
could our gathering of intelligent, data-minded brands and agencies give a little ripple of applause? Let's kick off by, the key question, and that is, what is attribution? And I think probably the first question should really go to you, Alex. Could you describe to our viewers exactly what this is all about?
Okay, so attribution is the question that a lot of people ask with regard to whether their marketing is working. So I'll give you an example, and then I'll give you a quick definition. So beer sales spike on a day, and the question is, was that due to the television advertising, or was that due to it being a scorching hot day? So attribution attempts to answer that question. Another question is, I sell mobile phones, and I've used both search advertising and I use television advertising. Which one of those is contributing to the increase in sales that I'm getting? So attribution is really the problem of assigning value and partial value, measuring and assigning partial value to every marketing contact that contributes to a desired outcome for an advertiser. And generally the desired outcome is a conversion event, some transaction which has associated with a dollar or pound value. Okay,
that sounds similar to an econometric model. How does it differ from the standard form of econometrics that many agencies would supply for their clients on a daily basis?
So, the econometric model is one approach that attempts to solve attribution. Typically, an econometric model is built with historical data over periods of 6 to 9 to 12 months, and it's trying to come up with a set of variables that's predicting what led to sales so that the marketer is better informed about it. What we're actually talking about with attribution is, can you use sort of the data that's actively transacted on, so media that's being served, the responses that you're getting, and assign a true value And generally that true value comes by doing what's called a marginal analysis. So what's the incremental gain that every marketing contact provided over the others? And the econometric models don't quite address that. They certainly play a role, and they play a role where they fill in for the lack of measurement, especially on offline media and so on. The digital world, we get the opportunity to say every transaction can be recorded and then analyzed.
Okay, thank you. Sylvain, you're doing more and more of attribution style work with your clients. Describe what success looks like. What kind of improvements are you finding when you apply attribution to the clients you work with?
The success we've been having are on two areas. The first one is on the way we are making our team work. Inside of Havas Media, we've built inside of Artemis, our data platform, self-service attribution. So any of our team members can pull attribution report on any campaign. And it has shown our team that they are not operating in silos anymore. What is done on display has an impact on search, which has an impact on real-time bidding also. So it has really helped change the mindset and making sure that we are all operating together in a more integrated way. With our clients, it's been a great way to show them the value of media they were neglecting before, like video on the internet at the beginning, like today real-time bidding, which has a much more important impact than what they thought at the beginning.
Okay. And Hugh, the work you're doing with your clients at the moment, are you finding that when you look at the array of different channels that your clients are using and you look at some sort of attribution model, is there a profound changes to the decisions that you're making in terms of spend and allocation?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest difference has been the level of detail that you can get when you move into more of an attribution approach versus a market mix model or an econometric model. We've used those for years, right? All agencies have. And they give you very high level understanding about big buckets of spend, but they don't necessarily allow you to drill very deep into a specific channel and get very detailed tactical information about what is and isn't working. And overlaying an attribution approach onto a market mix modeling approach allows you to go broad and deep. So I think the biggest thing for us has been getting information now, very tactical, granular information within a channel in terms of how that's driving the overall, whatever the business impact is that you're trying to generate. And that information really wasn't there when we were just using a market mix model approach.
Anthony, you've been in the digital business for a long time, and when attribution was never even heard of. We were talking at the time of display advertising banners, and not even networks probably weren't around at the time. Sorry to make you feel old, by the way.
Well, it's unavoidable.
How do you go about talking to clients when they look at attribution and sort of say to them, it looks, although we told you that digital is the most efficient medium that you could possibly use, and the ROI is much better than all the other things you've ever been using. By the way, now we're looking at the attribution model. It looks like you've been misallocating your spend for the last 5 years. Sorry, Mr. Client, it looks like we've been wasting your money.
It's a sensitive discussion to have. Essentially, the agencies have worked over the last 15 years to really start moving money into a digital environment, and a lot of the complexity has made people slow to move money. So the simplification of the process and the definition of success was a natural process to try and encourage marketers to move out of a conservative, this worked last year, so I'll start from that point this year, so a relatively slow organic process into something more dynamic to reflect the pace of consumer behavioural change. So the simplification has been a very important process of the successful evolution of a media mix to have a very significant component of digital. So we shouldn't say that everything we were doing before was wrong, but what we now have is a situation where it's possible, because of the advances in data science and technology tolerance to receive and match information, that we can dig more deeply than we did before. So we shouldn't say that everything we've done historically was wrong, but what we can now get to a greater degree of insight than historically was possible, And I think that's really how we should look at it. It's not about saying everything before was a waste of money. We achieved business growth and KPI growth for clients, but we had a very generic analysis of the return on investment, and we now can get to a far more specific analysis of the return on investment.
Okay, thanks. So, Alan, I mentioned in the introduction that one of your customers, clients, is Avis, and obviously with the sort of business which is a lot of online advertising, you can see immediately the connection between the amount spent in certain channels following through into actual online bookings and so on. So I guess in a way that's a perfect client to be trialing these new approaches to planning. What you've been beta testing with the Abakus platform. Give us some insights into what you've seen and how it's changing the mentality of you and your client.
Yeah. So I guess the first thing to mention is that we view Abakus and any attribution platform as a decision-making process. For us, it's not about technology. It's actually, there's 5 components in our view, which is people, platform, process, performance, and practice. And I think practice is a really important one, which goes to the idea that there is different approaches to attribution. Unfortunately, you can't go to Amazon and buy a masterclass or of case studies on attribution, because my belief is each attribution model is unique to each business. So back to the idea of it's a decision-making process, but it's also an optimization process. So what we've found very specifically, I'll give you a very perfect example just in looking at display. So the challenge that a lot of advertisers have with display is focusing on leveraging the first-party data that they have, usually retargeting. And those pools of first-party data are too small. So then you have to invest higher up the funnel, which is traditionally called prospecting. And I studied marketing, and the direct response perspective goes a frequency cap of 3 is a perfect way to maximize your direct response investment. The analysis that we did across 4 countries in Europe validated that no. So for retargeting, every impression after the first one had minimal or zero marginal value. From prospecting perspective, the marginal value only started after the second exposure. So it's decisions like that that we are trying to communicate to our clients. And in all honesty, our beautiful dashboards, our hour-long meetings important? Absolutely, because I think everybody here agrees. You have to bring the whole business on board. Attribution is no longer about just the marketing team. We're beginning to have conversations with finance directors. Talk about trying to explain to them where this industry's moved.
And are these sort of findings encouraging the finance directors to expedite more money on what might be called marketing? You have to find a different definition for this in this context. Or is it simply about getting more for less, or more value for the same budget?
Well, every client wants more for less.
Of course,
that's the nature of the industry we're in.
But are these findings,
oh, absolutely,
are they encouraging enough for companies to think, well, actually now we understand that if we pay more, we can also get incremental value?
And there's a division within Avis Budget Group, which is the international team, that actually looked at and they said, we're not going to hold different channels to a specific target. We're going to have a blended target across the whole of our digital. So search, display teams, affiliate, email, start working together because you're all in the same boat. And that's probably the most fundamental change from not only the data that we provided, but I think what's happening in the industry is that marketeers are realizing they also have a responsibility to push things forward and to help organize themselves and define targets that adapt to this new model.
I mean, many online marketing organizations now are beginning to understand the amount of marketing spend per customer to acquire a customer, and then knowing the period of time before that customer repays that investment, and then to understand ultimately the lifetime value of that customer. Is attribution giving you the tools to make those same sort of judgments and analysis?
I mean, lifetime value is a metric that has to come from the inner workings of the company. because we as an agency, we regard ourselves as consultants. We are there to help. Eventually, there's certain decisions, such as the development of lifetime value, that as a company, our clients have to develop them themselves. We can assist, but the ultimate decision to say, well, is it $125 or is it $455, based on what region of the world, what product, that has to come internally. But I think we do play a role in educating the clients about that.
Thank you. Alex, one of the elements of Abakus that makes it different in the marketplace is the application of game theory to the data sets that you have. Now, this is possibly the first time that the subject of game theory has ever been discussed on board a 100-foot yacht in the Cannes Marina, but let's give it a go. Could you explain exactly how, well, first of all, what game theory is for those people who don't know, and how you apply it to your methodology?
Okay, great. So game theory, is a branch of economics that actually came out of World War II, and it addresses the question of what strategy players in a game should adopt in order to, have a good outcome in the game or win the game. So the first application, obviously, World War II was in the war, and that's called competitive game theory, and was invented by a couple of gentlemen, von Neumann and Morgenstern. And there's actually another subfield of game theory that's called cooperative or collaborative game theory, which is about players combining to create something of value, and that is more amenable to the marketing and advertising field, because you've got, as Alan pointed out, you've got these multi-channels got to work together. So what game theory allows you to do is answer what's the best combination of players to put together in a game, and then more importantly, when they play the game, how do you figure out or evaluate what the contribution of each player has been. And it does it by computing what's called the marginal value. Now, this problem was actually solved, unlike competitive game theory, where you've got the concept of Nash equilibrium, which is a nice concept. It's hard to actually solve for. In collaborative game theory, there's a closed mathematical approach to computing it, and that's very interesting to us because we get very strong properties, and it's a science piece, very strong properties on which we can compute what we call a unique attribution, and then we'll leverage that and put the engineering around that to apply it to marketing advertising. So simple overview of how we do the mapping. The game, who's the game? Well, the user who sees an ad or is the recipient of advertising is the game, and you win the game when the user converts. Who's the player? The player is any marketing event that you can measure. So it could be the channel, it could be the advertiser, it could be the placement, the site, the creative messaging, any one of those. It can be hundreds of thousands of different players in a game. And finally, what's the source of the data? So the one thing about game theory is it's empirical. It comes up with this value of contribution of the players purely empirically from the data, and so it's very bottom-up, data-driven. In contrast to the MMM, marketing mix modeling, which is top-down.
Saldanha, is ultimately this technique applicable to some clients rather than other clients, or is this something that an Avis or a hotel booking organisation can get equal value to a packaged goods business or a luxury brand?
Well, what is very interesting into the application of collaborative game theory is that you compute contribution. So you end up with results that are really actionable. You know exactly what marketing event did contribute to the conversion. It's the opposite from doing after the campaign attribution models, where we will get learnings that will then be applied strategically to the next campaign. So with this kind of model, you can act quickly. So I could definitely recommend them for short conversion pace, where the user will go on the website and convert online very quickly. It may be more difficult to apply on lifetime value of the consumer because it will depend on the length of the marketing strategy. But I think it can accommodate both. It's a question of planning.
And okay, thank you. And Anthony, is this a technique that's applicable to both online and offline media?
Yeah, I mean the ability to associate the offline event to the individual is a lot harder to do in an offline context, of course. So that potentially brings in different components to the model, a different type of modelling technique to project the likelihood of an offline event, or indeed a social event or a mobile event, which are outside of a single data set context. So the first step, and I'm not a modelling expert, but my assumption of the first step would be to determine a time-stamped set of triggers that have been exposed on a marketing basis across a matched data set and an unmatched data set, and then on the back of that run the model once you've modelled in first the other events.
Yeah, okay. One of the issues, and I'll come to you in a second here, one of the issues here is, the big problem with rational choice theory was always that it all sounds great, prisoner's dilemma and so on, all sounds beautifully locked up, but consumers aren't rational at the end of the day. They make irrational choices. How do you cope with that within your model?
So, let me give it a little more context, and then I'll come back to hopefully make that clear. So, when we start with basic game theory, the formulation you have is this notion that when there are no players, there is no value, and so you're just figuring out what the players contribute. We have this notion when we adapt it to marketing that there's an inherent baseline, which means that there are some people who are going to convert for the advertiser just because they're already aware of the brand, maybe they're already a loyal customer, and the advertising has no marginal contribution, or a specific campaign had no marginal contribution to that. So we tried to first provide sort of the calculation which allows every calculation to be transparently reviewed by an advertiser when they're interested. So we're not just making a claim that this is the right answer. We actually explain through the data, A, what decision you should make, and B, what's the rationale for that decision. So hopefully you're trying to avoid the irrational choices that a marketer would make by just informing them transparently about, here's a calculation, here's what happened, here's what we recommend, and you can choose to do it or not. If you choose to do it, you then test and measure and come back in a few days and evaluate.
And also I would like to point out that the user needs to be trained, because if you take the model and look at it like it was operating in a vacuum, then the conclusion you will draw will be wrong. So that's why you need to inform the client, you need to train your team so that they will completely understand the results of the model, and also put it into perspective from any other influence that the user could have had when he took the decision to convert.
Okay. Hugh, what are the implications here on the creative product for your clients? It seems that there could be quite a large significance in terms of the impact.
I think so.
Dynamic
I think
content and so on.
Yeah, I think when you talk about one of the players being the messaging, right? So I think that the ability to start, as I said, to get very granular in terms of now the effectiveness that you can see of different messages on different channels, that should lead you to a more frequent rotation of messages, I think. And almost, it becomes a beautiful test case where you can throw out different messages in at different points in time. You can learn what is actually going to be really working for you, and then dynamically adjust the rotation based on that. So I don't think it's done as much as it should be yet, but I think it's a perfectly logical extension of the approach.
Well, what are Ava's finding with regards to the creative and the testing and
yeah. So our approach, I guess for all clients, is this idea, and it's funny that I say this being in charge of the media division, but the fact that media on its own will not trade a client into success or get them out of a difficult situation, because it's the whole end-to-end conversion process. And is it difficult to do? Absolutely. And I think a lot of agencies have tried and are still trying. We're trying. But the first element, if you think about it, is call it the ad promise, or the first point of exposure. And if you look at the creative, there's three basic elements to it. There's a call to action, there's the incentive, and there's a value proposition. Those are three elements that should be tested continually. Forget about copy, forget about messages. That's the easy part. It's those three elements. Because if you think about it, you change the incentive one day to another, that has an incredible, a big value impact on your bounce rate, your visit to quote rates, your quote to book rate in the case of Avis. So we've done a lot of, we've implemented Cognitive Match, which is a dynamic messaging platform, which has allowed us to not only dynamically change different elements, from the three elements that I mentioned, reduce Avis's production costs, which a creative agency wasn't very happy about. But it also brings the element of testing. And obviously, if you were to combine the learnings from, attribution into the A/B testing of creative, you have a years of testing and learning. So I think everybody agrees here is that it's a roadmap, right? It's not like you're going to implement a solution and within a month you're going to go, yeah, job done, let's all go home and let's carry on doing it.
And you've been even experimenting with the idea of dynamic websites.
Yeah, landing pages.
The landing pages, so, which probably moves this whole debate on. Explain a bit more about that.
So we believe that the first point of exposure is the ad, the first point of contact is the media, the first point of persuasion is a landing page, and bounce rate is probably the most underutilized metric in the entire digital spectrum. Bounce rate meaning the percentage of people that arrive to a landing page, be it in a mobile device, a tablet, or a desktop, and basically leave. Very different to exit rate, which means the person stays within that. But if you have a bounce rate of 90%, that basically means that only 10% of people that you paid for and refined and worked all this beautiful media suddenly just leave because the ad promise doesn't match the promise in the landing page. And that's a big part of our, not the most lucrative part of our business, but it's one where we're seeing a lot of need. But it adds complexity to the whole. Because if you think about it, it's the end-to-end conversion process. The good thing is it'll keep us in business for hopefully many years.
On that point, I think we learned in the search industry that if you didn't deep link from search, your conversion traffic reduced. So this dynamic pathing or dynamic design of website, which is obvious for click traffic, but we know click traffic is a small percentage of traffic that arrives to the website. If you can take the data observed through display activity and dynamically manage the design of where they land, regardless of how they come into the site, then you're obviously going to get a better experience, as we've seen most acutely from search. And again, it allows you to reflect whether or not someone is a recurring customer or a new customer, whether or not they've previously got to a certain point of conversion and have dropped out. The dynamic pathing concept is the extension of dynamic ad, dynamic landing page to a personalized structure of proposition and route through a website.
And in theory, how many different variations of a landing page could there be? Might I receive a different one at a different time of day, or a different one if I had booked Avis in 1 year but had booked a competitor another year? I mean, can you go that granular?
I think you use the 80-20 rule, right? I mean, for clients in our travel sector, you have 20 locations that pretty much make up 80% of the revenue. So there's no point in developing dynamic landing pages for 655 destinations if only the top 30 are performing. And obviously then you get into the incremental gains, right? You take care of the foundation, the big elements, and then you just keep refining. The other thing is a kind of business, right? I mean, a B&Q, a store that is, they make their business based DIY based on a change of weather. That brings in a huge factor that is not significant for other types of brands where weather is somewhat insignificant.
What will be interesting to look at is how, and it's essentially an attribution question, but it's a different sort of attribution question in that example, as if the 80% of destinations that are 20% of traffic, the customer that goes to Avis and knows that wherever he's going to or she is going to, they're going to get a deal. they're the ones that will go there first every time. And I'm sure there'll be an interesting analysis of people that go into long tail of destinations and how much more loyal they are than people that are going to the competitive destinations, and they'll always do a variety check because they know that Hertz will have an offer versus Avis. So there's lots of interesting attribution analytics that can be applied to portfolio access that I think will generate much broader learnings, and then you'll know when to offer price advantage, when not to price, where instead of being cheaper, it's an upgrade package. And this is where this what we're initially starting talking about, which is looking at ad exposure journey or a paid owned earned journey, but that same principle becomes much deeper as a technique applied to consumer proposition optimization, portfolio management, and the sort of things the airline industries have done very well around seat pricing over the years. The signals from behavior that influence the margin extraction.
Yeah. Hugh, among your client base, there's some clients that are extremely interested in this. There are others that are sort of less so. And how does this change the agency-client relationship?
Well, yes, there's a mix. There are certain clients. It's tough to generalize on an industry basis, because even within the same industry, you can see extremes from one client to the next. So I don't think it's as easy as to say, oh, automotive clients love it. They seem to, but I have an automotive client that doesn't. So yes, it varies, and I think it's more to do with the clients rather than the industry that they're in. It's fundamentally changing the relationship that we have with our clients, because we have tried over the last 18 months or so to move almost all of our clients to a pay-for-performance relationship. So rather than being paid the way that a traditional media agency is paid, on either a commission or scope of work type fee, actually be paid based on the business results that we collaborate and generate with them. And you can't do that unless you have proper solid attribution and predictability, which you can get with these kinds of models. So it fundamentally changes the relationship, because then you're essentially aligned, you have the same incentives as the client, which is to sell as much of their product.
Is these techniques, are you confident enough, given this is quite a nascent area of media, are you confident enough at the moment to have these results convince you to take more risk when it comes to the client relationship? Be principals more often in the trades, really cut back on fee-based remuneration to business results?
We are very willing to take risk, to the point of essentially saying that we'll work for no fee and earn it all on a performance basis. So yeah, again though, I think you have to look at your range of your clients as sort of and portfolio manage that risk, right? So there will be some clients where you may want to take more because you know that it's an industry where it's particularly elastic to advertising, for example, and there may be other industries where there are more, that you just don't want to double down as much. So yeah, you want to pick your bets, but when we make them, we're very aggressive.
Thank you. So in terms of geographies, are there areas across the world that are going to be pushing attribution and moving it forward more than others? Is this an American phenomenon that's seeping into Europe, or is this a European phenomenon that's seeping across the world? Are we going to see this in Latin America and in Asia over the next couple of years?
It's currently a question of maturity of the market. And the most sophisticated market we can find currently are North America and Europe. We have big clients for which we are using constant attribution modeling in France, in Spain, in the UK. And the US is really coming, but it's always we are seeing a less direct connection with clients doing a lot of performance. Most of our clients are asking us for attribution or doing a lot of branding, and it's more a question of finding the balance. How is the branding, how is the prospection impacting the rest of the company and my performance? And you need to have a client that is big enough, mature enough about the media, so that they will invest real dollars in branding on digital. So no real spread between region. In Asia, it's nascent. It's mostly a question of business model, but I think it could be applied everywhere.
Thank you. Thank you very much, panel. I'd take this opportunity now just to open this up for questions for a gathering here on the yacht who've been listening to this fascinating discussion. Are there any questions from the floor? Yes.
So in the discussion there, it's obvious that the kinds of marketing questions that are, that the advertisers seeking to answer are coming fast and furious. There's more questions than there are answers. So it begs the question on attribution, whether there's not only an issue of how accurate the process is to determine the right answer, but the speed in which you do it. Because obviously the faster you can get answers back and the faster that the process turns, the more iterative a marketer can be around the questions and answers and tactical solutions that they bring to the campaigns. Can you speak a little bit, can anybody on the panel speak to that question? Is that sort of an important aspect to this whole area of attribution?
So I think there are a few questions in that. I think one of the components is what are you doing with the output of the attribution analysis? I think ideally the attribution analysis will have a connection somehow so that that data of a reweighted contribution automatically feeds into optimization tools. Those optimization tools would be about design optimization, we've talked about that at length. It would obviously be about price optimization in buying paid inventory. It should also be about portfolio of product and how it's presented to market in terms of price margin, perishability. So the taking attribution without a human bottleneck between it to interpret and go and take it away. So that is one of the questions of how you can take a discipline and make it have a broader implication. The other is aiming for scientific perfection. I think we're conscious that there are so many different ways to make improvements. We can make improvements based on intuition and logic that we know is going to achieve an improvement, so we start building a momentum around a program of being more scientific and analytical and introducing more and more varied modeling techniques to get to the point where we are more certain that we're making the right decisions. But again, we've got 100% of spend, we'll have 100% of spend. We do know that not everybody that we're talking to is in market, and there is an ongoing visibility, presence, consideration benefit from stuff that can't be as scientifically measured.
I would add to that another question that must not be overlooked is what kind of data do I have? Because we need to make sure we plan for attribution. We need to make sure that we'll collect and organize and store the right data so that we'll be able to feed the model. Because the model can be perfect. Our connections to take action on the result can be fast, but if we do not have the right data at the beginning, we cannot do miracles.
Anna, has there been any temptation in your business to move too quickly?
No, we slow and steady. We talk to clients about hypothesis. So when we talk to a client about we are going to optimize your campaign this way, we don't simply say trust us because we've been in the business for X amount of years and we have the best media planning team in the world and we have great partners. We actually say this is a hypothesis that we believe, and we also have to go through a process of validation and counter-validation. And what that allows us to do is to reach confidence levels. And I think we all agree here, and to your point, that what we have to work as an industry with clients is to higher confidence levels. I no longer can afford to talk to clients about absolutes. Give me an ROI projection for 2015. I'll give you the lottery number, the winning lottery number for 2015 then. So I think and it ties back to your question as well, which is my belief is that, yes, the decision making has to become quicker, but what we have to strive for is to higher degrees of confidence as opposed to these absolutes of this is the absolute decision that you need to make today as opposed to
Thank you. Sorry, do you still have a question?
Yes. One of the questions I had was, if you think about kind of the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of different creative placements and different media types coming kind of recycled through, right? And now with this kind of cutting edge field and ways of doing attribution, kind of last clip or last view, what kind of tectonic shifts do you think may happen from inventory, or how publishers kind of capture consumers' attention, which then obviously buy and sell?
Hugh, what have you got to
I mean, I think just from the work that, I don't know if this is the right answer to your question, but I think from having seen some of the outputs from these types of analyses, we're seeing a lot more shift into online video. I mean, that's a very real thing that I think was historically undervalued, that seems to consistently come through as being highly valuable when you. So I think that is a shift, certainly.
Interesting. Are you finding that in the studies you're doing?
Yeah, our conclusions vary by client, they vary by industry. We see sometimes, surprising results. Search has high value. Sometimes search should be valued less than than you expect in some cases. We certainly see that there'll be a trimming of how you value inventory, and if you're just buying inventory on exchanges, potentially on the very long tail, we'll see less value there than we're seeing on sites, and this varies again by advertisers.
So do you think that this growing analysis will help in mopping up some of the oversupply in the digital marketplace? Right?
Yeah, I definitely think so. It will push publishers to ask themselves the question, what is my inventory that contribute to performance? And they will very easily see that they need to get rid of all the rest. So we will move to more scarcity, which will be fantastic for our market.
I think another element, which is probably more technical, not so much on the ad format, but if we've seen this, we've probably all seen it as consumers, is a page that's loaded with 6 ads. Yeah. And, long time ago it used to be, well, you have share a voice of that page. That's a good thing. And people will go, sure, because it was all about editorial context. Now that's an issue, right? Because that's fair. There's a name for it. It's called cookie bombing. And that affects performance. And now there is technology that allows us to measure visibility, or to avoid the banner pileup, as I call it, on pages, which is one of those changes that better attribution, visibility, and the subject of attribution is bringing to, I guess, publishers.
What happens to attribution if cookies get rejected, disallowed in some markets, turned off by consumers in others? Is that the end of attribution?
I don't think so. I mean, I think there are, we've been playing around with using panels to try and get at some of these issues with opt-in panels. So, theoretically they would opt in to continue to have cookies.